The Dapper Man. Today's video, or podcast really, is about style and substance. Specifically, how we can't hold a candle to those who lived prior to the 1970s. Men in those decades had style and substance in spades. And today's video will address why I say that and what we can learn that is applicable to the 21st century man. Now, I'm sure there were social expectations and social norms and a need to conform in terms of why so many men in the early 1900s right until the 1950s and 60s dressed the way they did. But I also think that it was a tremendous reflection of their own self-care, self-respect, and at least some considered representation of how a man, a gentleman, might present themselves, might communicate, might behave in public. In terms of style, you can think of more notable names and actors like Cary Grant, or you could have a closer look at any photo from these decades, from the early 1900s right up until the mid-century, mid-19th century, and see that style is timeless. And we could highlight these stylistic elements from head to toe. In terms of headwear, fedoras, various iterations of flat caps or newsboy caps, have stood the test of time. In terms of hairstyles, you can't argue that men didn't have well-kept hairstyles that were by and large conservative. In terms of facial hair, It was either kept at bay or deliberately groomed and modest. In terms of the top half of the body, collared shirts at best a buttoned-up collared shirt, at worst a polo, and vests, cardigans, blazers, suit jackets. And those tops would be tucked into trousers. I'm sure there would have been a place for shorts in athletic pursuits or by the poolside, but trousers as the norm. And ubiquitous leather footwear. Now we're going to accessories like canes or watches, or indulge in top hats or monocles or fob watches. Or briefcases necessarily. But with those articles that I've mentioned, you can't deny that that equates to a well put together gentleman. And men in these eras paid attention to what they wore, irrespective of their socioeconomic status or their occupation. If we take a moment to contrast that with the tides of fashion that have since come and gone, and indeed what just so happens to be on trend in 2025, from head to toe, well, you couldn't really argue that anything more than a trucker cap or a baseball cap or a beanie is the epitome of headwear. Hairstyles vary wildly, from somewhat conservative to fairly rustic, alternative, attention grabbing, and dishevelled. Likewise for facial hair, there are some spectacular beards roaming the community, but there are also some fellas who are probably better off being clean shaven than trying to give the impression of a fully formed beard. In terms of tops, There is a wide gamut of choices being made, from t-shirts to polos to button-up shirts, but equally paired with athletic jackets, hoodies, sweaters, and depending on where you live and what you do for work, the odd suit jacket or blazer. Tucking in your shirt is equally variable in uptake, and you certainly couldn't bank on men wearing trousers. Again, varying depending on your occupation. And then, in terms of footwear, well, leather shoes are probably the exception to the norm, by and large. With everything from flip-flops and Crocs to sneakers and boots, to industrial footwear, to the occasional dressy, quote-unquote, leather shoes worn by perhaps some yuppie business types. Again, I won't go into accessories like watches or phones or wallets or jewelry, but clearly there's a contrast between the man of today, sartorially speaking, and the men of yesteryear. And let me be clear, I am not for one moment advocating a mandatory return to Brill cream, comb overs, and 24/7 suffocation with ties. Because as much as there is freedom in fashion choices among men these days, you can't also have a meaningful discussion about style without talking about function. And while some men may have been able to get away with wearing a shirt and tie to work on a car, I think there comes a point where keeping up appearances for the sake of appearances becomes a little bit silly. And so specialized clothing for specialized occupations have come about for comfort, safety, practicality, functionality, washability, sustainability. And so I definitely think that is an advantage of social expectations and norms in this day and age. But I would also counter that we can still learn from the Dapper Men of yore in several regards. Firstly, personal grooming is a reflection on your own self-care, self-respect, and discipline, diligence, and attention to detail. It's not so much that how your hair on your head or your face looks, or how expensive your shirt may be, but the idea that you've taken time to maintain basic hygiene, to not let things be for the sake of being, that you've been deliberate and conscious in your routine, that reflects well on the person, or it doesn't reflect well on the person. So having a standard of personal grooming, I think, is something that we can definitely replicate. Style, as we said, is timeless, so I think for all the fashions that do come and go, another thing that modern men could do well to embrace is the idea of ignoring garish brand names and labels, and having a wardrobe with stylish, timeless, staple items that won't go out of fashion. And that would extend to the colour palettes and the patterns, or lack thereof. So I think the timelessness of style in the early 20th century is again something that the modern man can incorporate. And going along with that would be the idea of durability, that investing in some functional and durable articles of clothing gets you a return on your investment over a much longer period of time. And it also takes away any incentives for makers and manufacturers and stores to stock items that literally fall apart or become unwearable because of holes or fading. And so the idea of well-constructed garments and durability is another, I think, enduring element of the substance that stands behind the style. I suppose one other thing that the modern man has an advantage over our forebearers is that individualism and choice in what you wear or how you look is freely available. And so although people in the 1900s may have looked a little cookie cutter and homogeneous, I think that individual expression is not mutually exclusive to style. And so combining the stylistic elements, the substance of the mid-1900s with the functionality and individuality and multicultural nature of our modern societies, I think that men can definitely cultivate a style that strikes a balance. Again, starting from the top, I think it's great to see a range of headwear. I think that we can all be glad that there's only a temporary resurgence of mullets, and that maintaining a mullet still counts as a form of grooming. I think it's great that we have a spectrum of people who maintain a clean-shaven appearance and others who are more meticulous in grooming their mustaches and their beards. But that straddling those two extremes serves no one well. I think that it's great that we have a range of choices for our torsos, but that we can still pay attention to fit and the finishing of garments, and the fabrics. I think it's great that we can wear trousers and shorts depending on the situation, but I think the keyword there would be depending rather than the norm. I think there is a huge amount of consumerism and throwaway culture in footwear, and it would be nice to think about being in possession of footwear that is both stylish but also durable. And I think we are fortunately in a decade where overt branding and short-sighted graphics, slogans, and attention-grabbing logos aren't as popularized. But it would also be incredible if people were more educated in their purchasing decisions and not purely being driven by cost or first impressions. And so A Dapper Man in the 2020s can have style, can have individual expression, can have flexibility, can have functionality. Seeks to make informed purchase decisions. Seeks to have some measure of durability and timelessness, and seeks to take responsibility for their grooming, for their appearance, not just because of aesthetic or superficial reasons, but because it's a reflection of substance and themselves. That, I posit, is the 21st century definition of a dapper man.